The rusted storage unit door groaned in protest as Mike Harper heaved it upward, revealing his newest acquisition, a decommissioned NASA spacecraft that had cost him exactly $47.16 at the government surplus auction. Sunlight glinted off its hull, cutting through decades of dust that danced in the air around him. What had started as a joke bid after 6 beers had somehow gone uncontested. Now, the 32-year-old mechanic from Arizona owned an actual spaceship. "This has to be some kind of mistake," Mike muttered to himself, circling the craft that barely fit in the rented storage unit. The ship wasn't particularly large, maybe the size of a small RV, but its design was unlike anything he'd ever seen in NASA documentaries. Sleek, almost organic curves replaced the boxy utilitarian design he'd expected. The hull bore strange, iridescent markings that seemed to shift color as he moved around it. His phone buzzed. His buddy Tom texting, "Did you actually buy that space junk? Man, you're gonna be the laughingstock of Phoenix." Mike sighed and pocketed his phone. The spacecraft might be worthless junk, but something about it called to him. He'd always been good with machines, could fix just about anything with an engine, and this was the ultimate fixer-upper. If nothing else, he could strip it for parts and maybe recover some of his meager investment. Running his hand along the smooth exterior, Mike felt a subtle vibration, like the craft was humming beneath his fingertips. He paused at what appeared to be a hatch, searching for any kind of handle or control panel. Finding nothing obvious, he pressed his palm against the surface in frustration. The ship responded at a seamless section of hull reseated with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit interior. Mike stumbled back, heart hammering in his chest. "No way," he whispered. "No freaking way." After several minutes of staring into the opening, curiosity finally overcame caution. He grabbed the flashlight from his toolbox and ducked inside. The interior was surprisingly spacious, with sleek control panels covered in symbols that definitely weren't English or any Earth language he recognized. But what really caught his attention was the pods. 6 transparent chambers built into the walls. 5 were empty. The 6th contained what appeared to be a woman. Mike nearly fell backward out of the ship. "Hello," he called, his voice cracking. The figure didn't move. He approached cautiously, raising his flashlight. Through the transparent covering, he could see she had pale blue skin with faint markings similar to those on the ship's hull. Her features were eerily human-like, yet distinctly alien. "This can't be real," he muttered. "Some kind of mannequin or movie prop, has to be." As if responding to his voice, the pod's covering suddenly slid open. The blue-skinned woman's eyes snapped open, startling violet irises fixed directly on him. Mike froze as she sat up smoothly, moving with an inhuman grace that confirmed she was definitely not a mannequin. She spoke, her voice melodic but utterly incomprehensible. Mike backed away slowly. "I don't understand. Who are you?" The alien woman tilted her head, studying him intently. Then she reached out and touched his forehead. Pain exploded behind Mike's eyes, followed by a cascade of images. A red planet that wasn't Mars, massive crystalline cities, ships like this one fleeing as the skies burned. When the pain subsided, the woman spoke again. This time, her words were stilted but understandable. "I am Lyra, last survivor of reconnaissance vessel. You have awakened me." Her violet eyes narrowed. "Where are we?" "This is not the designated rendezvous point." "Earth," Mike managed to say. "We're on Earth. How can you suddenly speak English?" "I took your language," she replied simply. "Temporary neural connection." She swung her legs over the edge of the pod and attempted to stand, only to collapse against him. Mike caught her reflexively. "The others?" she asked, looking at the empty pods. Mike shook his head. "There's no one else. Just you." Her expression hardened. "Then we must go. Now." Go where?" "You can barely stand. They followed us to your solar system," she interrupted, gripping his arm with surprising strength. "If I am awake, the beacon is active. They will come." "Who will come?" Mike asked, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Lyra's violet eyes locked with his. "The ones who destroyed my world. The ones who will destroy yours if we don't deliver this ship to my people." She gestured to the control panel. "Can you pilot?" Before Mike could answer, the ship hummed to life around them, exterior lights flickering on as systems reactivated. Outside, his phone began ringing insistently. "Mike?" called a familiar voice. His neighbor, an ex-NASA engineer. "Mike, are you in there? You need to get out right now. The military just called me. Whatever you bought, they want it back. They're on their way." Mike looked from the open hatch to the alien woman beside him, and realized his life would never be the same again. Mike's mind raced as he looked back and forth between Lyra and the storage unit entrance. The military? Coming here? For this ship? For her? How long do we have? Lyra asked, her voice stronger now as she steadied herself against the control panel. "I don't know, minutes maybe?" Mike ran his hands through his hair. "Look, I can't just, this is crazy. I fix cars for a living. I'm not some space hero." Lyra's violet eyes narrowed. "You awaken me. The ship responded to you. That is unusual." She touched the console, and symbols flickered to life beneath her fingertips. "Your DNA was scanned when you entered. The ship recognized something in you." Outside, tires screeched on asphalt. Mike's neighbor shouted again, more urgently this time. Black SUVs just pulled up. "You've got seconds." Making a split-second decision that would forever alter his life, Mike slammed his palm against a panel near the entrance. The hatch sealed with a soft hiss. "Can this thing actually fly?" he asked, heart pounding. Lyra nodded, moving with increasing confidence to the central control area. "It was damaged during our escape, but the self-repair systems have been working while I was in stasis. We may not be able to reach deep space, but we can break planetary orbit." "That's not exactly reassuring." Mike watched as she worked the alien controls. "Wait, how long were you in that pod?" Lyra paused, calculations visibly running behind her eyes. "By your Earth calendar, approximately 47 years. Mike's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. You look..." He stopped himself. How would he know what aging looked like for her species? The auction listing said this was decommissioned NASA equipment from the 2010s. "A cover story," Lyra said dismissively. "Your government found us in what you call the Mojave Desert in 1977. They've been studying this ship for decades, unable to activate its systems." A smile touched her lips. They would never have sold it if they knew it still functioned. The ship hummed louder, vibrations running through the floor. Howling voices and pounding on the storage unit door. "Federal agents. Open up immediately." "We need to launch now," Lyra said, gesturing Mike toward what appeared to be a seat. "They will try to take the ship by force." But Mike's protests died as he glanced at the sealed hatch, imagining men with guns on the other side. "My life is here. My job, my apartment. Your planet will have no future if we don't deliver this ship to my people," Lyra countered. "The technology it contains is the only defense against the Vex." "The Vex? The ones who destroyed my world. Harvesters of resources and technology. They detected our solar system's unique mineral composition and attacked without warning." Her voice remained steady, but pain flashed across her features. "My team was sent to find allies. We believed Earth might be compatible with our technology." The storage unit's metal door began to buckle as something heavy rammed against it. "We're out of time," Lyra said. "Choose now." Mike strapped himself into the seat, gripping the edges tight. "Just don't crash into my apartment building on the way out, okay?" Lyra's hands danced across the controls. The ship's engines ignited with a sound like rolling thunder, and the entire craft levitated a foot off the ground. With a sudden burst of power, it shot upward, tearing through the storage unit roof like it was paper. The desert landscape fell away beneath them at impossible speed. Mike watched through a viewscreen as emergency vehicles grew smaller and smaller, replaced by a widening vista of Phoenix, then all of Arizona, and finally the curvature of the Earth itself. His stomach lurched, not just from the acceleration but from the reality of what he'd just done. "They're tracking us," Lyra said calmly, pointing to blinking symbols on a display. "Primitive missiles. Easily outpaced." "Those are nuclear," Mike shouted, recognizing the alert pattern from movies. "They'll blow us out of the sky." They would risk irradiating their own atmosphere? Lyra seemed genuinely surprised. If they think you're a threat? Yes. Mike clutched his seat tighter as the ship banked sharply. Lyra's expression hardened. She tapped a sequence of commands, and the ship shuddered. A pulse of energy rippled outward, invisible except for the slight distortion of the air it created. What was that? Mike asked. Electromagnetic disruption. Their weapons and tracking systems will be disabled temporarily. She studied the controls. Now we need a place to hide while I complete repairs. Where could we possibly hide a spaceship? Lyra pointed to the view screen, where Earth's gray satellite loomed. Your moon has a dark side. The far side, Mike corrected automatically. It's not actually dark, just never visible from Earth. He paused as the implications hit him. Wait, we're going to the moon? Right now. Lyra nodded. It will take approximately 22 of your minutes. As the blue of Earth's atmosphere faded to the star-speckled blackness of space, Mike stared in awe. Questions tumbled through his mind faster than he could voice them. Why me? He finally managed. Why did the ship respond to me? Lyra turned to face him fully, her expression inscrutable. That is what I have been trying to understand. The ship's security is coded to recognize only Lyrian DNA. She tilted her head. Yet it accepted you as authorized personnel. What are you saying? I'm saying, Lyra replied slowly, that somewhere in your ancestry, our species have met before. And that, Earthman, should be impossible. Mike stared at Lyra, her words hanging in the air between them. That's impossible. I'm just a regular guy from Arizona. My family's been there for generations. Perhaps not all generations, Lyra replied, turning back to the controls. The lunar surface grew larger on the view screen, its cratered landscape ghostly and barren. There is much about your planet's history that remains unknown, even to your own kind. The ship descended into a massive crater on the far side of the moon, settling gently on the gray dust. Through the view screen, Earth hung like a blue marble against the blackness of space, partially obscured by the crater's rim. We should be safe here temporarily, Lyra said, powering down non-essential systems. The damage is not severe, but repairs will take at least 6 hours. Mike unbuckled himself cautiously, testing his legs in the lower gravity. So while we're waiting, maybe you could explain what the hell is going on? Like why Earth governments have been hiding your ship for nearly 50 years? Or why these Vex things want to destroy us? Or, I don't know, why my DNA somehow matches alien code? Lyra's expression softened slightly. Your frustration is understandable. She gestured to a panel that slid open, revealing what appeared to be a small food preparation area. You should eat. The neural connection we shared expends considerable energy. Mike hadn't realized how hungry he was until she mentioned it. He accepted a small, translucent cube that tasted surprisingly like beef stew. As he ate, Lyra began to explain. My world, Lyria, orbits a star you would call Epsilon Eridani. We achieved interstellar travel over 3 centuries ago, but maintained a policy of non-interference with developing worlds. She brought up a holographic display showing a star system. When the Vex arrived, we were unprepared. They are not a species as you understand it. They are synthetic, created by another race long extinct. They exist to consume resources and expand. Like intergalactic locusts, Mike murmured. Lyra nodded. An apt comparison. They strip planets of useful elements and move on. My team was dispatched to seek allies and safe havens for our remaining population. We identified Earth as potentially compatible due to your species' genetic structure. And that's where I come in, Mike asked. In part, our reconnaissance mission landed in what you call Nevada in 1957. Wait, Roswell? Mike's eyes widened. That was real. Not exactly as your myths describe, but yes. We established contact with a small group of humans, including scientists who understood the threat the Vex posed. They agreed to help hide our presence from your military forces, but a loud alarm suddenly blared through the ship. Lyra rushed to the control panel, her blue skin paling to an almost white shade. No, she whispered. They followed us somehow. Mike joined her at the console, though the alien symbols meant nothing to him. The military? Already? Not your military. Lyra's voice turned grave. The Vex. A scout ship has entered your solar system. She pointed to a blinking light near Mars on the display. They've established a forward base on your fourth planet. Mars? They're on Mars. Mike felt his knees weaken. But how did they find us? The stasis pod activation, Lyra said grimly. When you woke me, it sent an automatic distress signal. I thought I had disabled it in time, but... She trailed off, fingers moving frantically across the controls. We must complete repairs and leave immediately. Leave where? To the rendezvous coordinates. Remains of my fleet are gathering to mount a final defense. Her violet eyes met his. Your presence complicates matters, but there is no alternative now. Mike paced the small cabin, trying to process everything. So let me get this straight. Aliens have set up shop on Mars. They want to strip mine Earth. And now we're their first target because I accidentally woke you up. Essentially correct, Lyra confirmed, already beginning repair work on an exposed panel of circuitry. Great. Just great. Mike ran his hands through his hair. And what about this DNA thing? You still haven't explained that. Lyra hesitated, then pressed a sequence on the console. A compartment opened, revealing what looked like a journal with strange markings. This belonged to our team leader. His log entries mention a genetic exchange program with willing human participants. Small alterations that would allow humans to interface with our technology if the Vex ever found Earth. She flipped through the pages. The last entry mentions a family in a desert region. Their name was Harper, Mike finished, his throat dry. My grandfather used to tell stories about being taken to the stars by angels. Everyone thought he was crazy or drunk. He swallowed hard. My dad refused to even talk about it. Lyra nodded solemnly. You are a bridge between our worlds, Mike Harper. One of very few. The ship shuddered violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. Warning symbols flashed across all displays. They're here, Lyra whispered. A Vex hunter drone. It must have been closer than the main force. Through the view screen, Mike watched in horror as a metallic object the size of a bus descended into their crater. Unlike Lyra's organic-looking ship, the Vex craft was all sharp angles and protruding sensors, like an enormous mechanical spider. Can we fight it? Mike asked, panic rising in his chest. Not in our current state, Lyra responded, her hands flying over the controls. Our weapons systems are still offline. We must hide. On the moon? Where exactly? Not on the surface. Lyra pointed to a display showing what appeared to be tunnels beneath the lunar crust. Your moon is not as solid as your scientists believe. There are networks of caverns, some natural, some created by my people during previous expeditions. The ship hummed to life, hovering just above the surface. With expert precision, Lyra guided it toward a dark fissure in the crater wall barely wide enough for their craft. Behind them, the Vex drone deployed what looked like weaponry, its surface glowing with building energy. Hold on, Lyra warned, accelerating suddenly toward the narrow opening. Mike gripped his seat as the ship plunged into darkness, scraping against rock with a sound that set his teeth on edge. Behind them, the moon's surface erupted as the Vex weapon discharged, sending a shower of lunar dust and rock into space. The passageway twisted downward, growing tighter with each turn. Warning lights flashed as the hull scraped against stone repeatedly. Mike could barely breathe, certain they would be crushed at any moment. Finally, the tunnel opened into a vast underground cavern, dimly lit by bioluminescent growths along the walls. And they weren't alone as Lyra set the ship down on a smooth stone platform. Mike stared in disbelief at the scene before them. The cavern contained the ruins of what could only be described as a city, alien architecture seamlessly blended with the natural lunar rock. And moving among the structures were figures with the same blue skin as Lyra. What is this place? Mike whispered. Home, Lyra replied softly. Or what's left of it. The last Lyrian outpost in your solar system. She turned to face him fully. And our last hope against what's coming. Above them, the cavern ceiling shook as another Vex blast hit the surface. Dust and small rocks rained down. The Vex knew they were here. And they were digging. The cavern trembled again as Mike and Lyra exited their ship. Several blue-skinned figures approached cautiously, speaking rapidly in their melodic language. Lyra responded, gesturing urgently toward the ceiling where dust continued to rain down. "What are they saying?" Mike asked, staying close to Lyra as the strangers regarded him with clear suspicion. "They're surprised to see one of their scout ships return after so many years," Lyra explained. "More surprised to see a human with Lyrian genetic markers." She continued the conversation, growing increasingly agitated. "This isn't good. The colony's defenses are minimal. They've been in hiding for decades. If the Vex break through..." A tall, regal-looking Lyrian with elaborate markings stepped forward. Unlike the others, he wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor with glowing circuitry embedded throughout. "This is Varen," Lyra said quietly. "Colony Elder. He was second in command of our original expedition." Varen addressed Mike directly in halting English. "You carry the altered genome. The Harper bloodline." His piercing gaze was unsettling. "We monitored your family for generations, waiting for the right moment." "Monitored?" Mike felt a chill. "What does that mean exactly?" Before Varen could answer, a deafening crack split the air. All eyes turned upward as a fissure appeared in the cavern ceiling, red light pouring through the opening. The Vex were breaking through faster than expected. "To the inner sanctum," Varen ordered, leading them deeper into the lunar city. As they ran, Mike noticed the architecture becoming more elaborate, the bioluminescent light growing brighter. They passed chambers filled with strange equipment, gardens of alien plants, and what appeared to be living quarters. "I don't understand," Mike panted as they ran. "How is any of this possible? How do you survive here?" "The moon has what we need: water ice in the permanently shadowed craters, minerals in the regolith," Lyra explained between breaths. "And we brought the rest with us." They reached a massive circular door that spiraled open at Varen's touch. Inside was a chamber unlike anything Mike had ever seen, a perfect spherical room with a glowing blue orb suspended in its center. Around the orb, holographic displays showed various star systems, with one particular region highlighted in red. "The Nexus Core," Lyra whispered reverently. "I didn't know one had survived." Varen approached a control panel. "It is the last of its kind. We've kept it hidden, using minimal power to avoid detection." He turned to Mike, his expression grave. "But now that the Vex have found us, we have no choice but to activate it fully." Another explosion rocked the chamber. Fragments of rock fell from above. "They're nearly through," someone shouted from a monitoring station. Varen nodded to several technicians who began working frantically at various stations. "The Nexus must be moved to Earth. It is the only way." "Move to Earth?" Mike repeated. "What exactly is this thing?" "It is both weapon and shield," Lyra explained. "A quantum field generator capable of disrupting the Vex neural network. With it properly deployed, we could protect your planet." "But there's a catch. Isn't there?" Mike asked, recognizing the tension in her voice. Varen answered instead. "The Nexus requires a compatible organic interface to reach full power, a mind that can bridge Lyrian technology with the local environment. We designed the genetic modifications in your bloodline for this purpose." Mike backed away. "Whoa, hold on. You're saying my grandfather was part of some experiment so you could use his descendants as some kind of biological computer?" "It's more complex than that," Lyra interjected. "The interface is symbiotic, not parasitic. But yes, the Harper line was specifically chosen and modified." The cavern shook violently. A section of ceiling collapsed in the corridor outside, and distant screams echoed through the complex. "They've breached the outer defenses." A young Lyrian burst into the chamber, bleeding from a head wound. "Hunter drones are inside the colony. Dozens of them." Varen turned to Mike, his expression hardened with urgency. "We have no more time for explanations. Will you help us, son of Harper? Without the Nexus, both our peoples are doomed. Before Mike could respond, the chamber door burst inward. A Vex hunter drone scuttled in, a nightmarish amalgamation of metal and synthetic tissue, multiple red sensors focusing immediately on the glowing orb at the center of the room. Two Lyrian guards fired energy weapons, their beams slicing through the drone's outer shell. It retaliated with brutal efficiency, tendrils of crackling energy lashing out and reducing the guards to ash in seconds. Lyra pushed Mike behind a console as more drones poured in. The Nexus! They're after the Nexus! Varen made a desperate dash for the control panel but was cut down by a Vex beam halfway there. As he fell, he tossed a small device toward Mike. It skittered across the floor, stopping at his feet. The activation key. Lyra shouted. Take it! Mike grabbed the device, a small crystalline object that pulsed with inner light. The moment his fingers closed around it, the crystal flared brilliantly, responding to his touch. The sensation was electric, sending tingles up his arm and into his mind. Images flooded his consciousness, stars, planets, the vast networks of Vex machines spreading like a cancer through the galaxy. But also memories not his own. His grandfather as a young man, volunteering for a procedure he didn't fully understand, believing he was helping prepare humanity for a greater destiny among the stars. Focus! Lyra's voice cut through the mental deluge. She was at his side now, half dragging him toward the Nexus orb. The crystal contains the activation protocols. You need to merge it with the core. The remaining Lyrians formed a defensive perimeter, buying them precious seconds as more Vex drones swarmed in. Mike could see the lunar surface through the massive breach in the cavern ceiling. Earth hanging in the black sky, beautiful and vulnerable. What happens to me if I do this? Mike asked, clutching the crystal that continued to pulse in sync with his heartbeat. Lyra's violet eyes met his. I don't know, she admitted. No human has ever interfaced with a Nexus before. The genetic modifications were theoretical. Another explosion rocked the chamber. One of the support columns cracked, threatening to bring down the entire structure. There's something else you should know, Lyra added quickly. Your government, the people who had our ship, they know about the colony. They've known for decades. What? Mike stared at her in disbelief. A secret agreement. Protection for technology. But they betrayed us when the Vex signals were first detected near Mars. They tried to seize the Nexus for themselves. Her expression was pained. That's why we went into hiding. Why the ship you found was abandoned. A Vex drone broke through the defensive line, scuttling directly toward them. Lyra fired her weapon repeatedly, slowing it down but not stopping its advance. We don't have any more time, she shouted. Make your choice, Mike Harper. Are you with us or not? The crystal burned in Mike's palm now, almost as if it were trying to meld with his flesh. Through the chaos, his eyes found Earth again, home, with everyone and everything he had ever known. What happens if I refuse? He asked, already knowing the answer. The Vex take the Nexus, Lyra said grimly. And then they take Earth. Mike took a deep breath and stepped toward the glowing orb, crystal extended. As he approached, the Nexus pulsed brighter, reaching out with tendrils of blue energy that began to envelop him. Behind him, he heard Lyra cry out as the Vex drone finally reached her position. The last thing Mike saw before the blue light consumed his vision was a massive shadow falling across the lunar surface visible through the cavern breach. A Vex mothership arriving from Mars, its impossible size eclipsing the distant Earth. His choice had just become infinitely more complicated. The blue energy from the Nexus core engulfed Mike completely, lifting him off the ground. Time seemed to slow as his consciousness expanded beyond the confines of his body. Every molecule in his being resonated with the alien technology, the modified genes in his DNA unlocking like a key turning in a complex lock. In that suspended moment, Mike understood everything. The crystal merged with his palm, becoming part of him as information flooded his mind. The history of Lyria, the true nature of the Vex, and the desperate plan that had been set in motion decades ago when his grandfather first met the aliens. He could see Lyra fighting desperately against the Vex drone, her movements seeming glacially slow from his accelerated perspective. He could feel the rumble of the colony collapsing around them, the vibrations of the approaching Vex mothership altering the moon's gravitational field, and then, with startling clarity, he knew what he had to do. Mike reached out with his mind, connecting fully with the Nexus core. The orb pulsed in response, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. The chamber filled with blue-white light as the Nexus began to transform, its energy field expanding outward through the walls of the chamber, through the lunar rock, reaching toward space. The Vex drones froze in place, their systems disrupted by the quantum field. One by one they fell to the ground, inert. The surviving Lyrians watched in awe as the Nexus energy continued to expand, encompassing the entire colony. Mike felt himself becoming something more than human, a conduit for the ancient technology. Through his connection to the Nexus, he could sense the massive Vex mothership adjusting its course, attempting to counteract the disruption field. "Not today," Mike whispered, his voice resonating with harmonic overtones. He focused his will through the Nexus, amplifying the field's power. The effort was excruciating, like his very soul was being stretched to its breaking point. Lyra managed to destroy the drone attacking her and staggered to the edge of the energy field surrounding Mike. "It's working," she shouted. "The Nexus is responding to you far beyond our projections." Through the breach in the cavern Kaylee. They watched as the energy field reached the Vex mothership. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a wave hitting an invisible barrier, the massive vessel shuddered. Systems failed across its surface as the quantum disruption penetrated its defenses. The ship began to list, drifting off course. The Mars base, Mike managed to say, his consciousness now divided between his body and the vast network of Vex technology he could suddenly access. "I can see it. I can feel their network." He extended his awareness further, using the Nexus to reach all the way to the red planet where the Vex had established their forward base. The strain was unbearable. Blood began to trickle from Mike's nose and ears as he pushed the Nexus beyond its designed limits. But he could see it working, the Vex systems on Mars beginning to fail, their coordinated network falling into chaos. "Mike, you need to stop," Lyra cried out, seeing his physical distress. "The Nexus wasn't designed to extend this far. It's drawing too much from you." "Almost done," Mike gasped. With one final surge of willpower, he directed the full force of the Nexus toward the central control node of the Vex Mars base. He could visualize it clearly now, a pulsing core of artificial intelligence that coordinated the entire invasion force. The connection was established. Through the Vex own network, Mike sent a devastating feedback loop, using their technology against them. On the view screens around the chamber, the Lyrians watched in astonishment as explosions bloomed across the surface of Mars. The Vex mothership, now completely disabled, began to drift toward the lunar surface, its massive bulk threatening to crash directly into the colony. "We need to evacuate," one of the Lyrian technicians shouted. "The mothership will impact in minutes." Mike felt himself slipping, the connection to the Nexus becoming unstable as his body reached its physical limits. With the last of his strength, he focused on one final task, redirecting the falling Vex ship away from the moon and toward the sun. It would take years for the derelict vessel to reach the star, but its trajectory was now irreversibly set. The blue energy surrounding Mike flickered and then dissipated. He collapsed to the floor, the now dormant crystal fused permanently to his palm. Lyra rushed to his side, cradling his head. "You did it," she whispered, tears in her violet eyes. "You stopped them." Mike struggled to focus, his vision blurring. "Not stopped," he corrected weakly. "Delayed. I saw into their network. There are more coming. Many more. But not for years." Around them, the surviving Lyrians were already mobilizing, gathering essential equipment and heading for evacuation ships. The colony was severely damaged and wouldn't survive much longer. "We need to get you to a medical pod," Lyra said, helping Mike to his feet. He leaned heavily against her as they made their way through the crumbling passages. "Earth needs to know," he mumbled. "They need to prepare." "They will," Lyra assured him. "Thanks to you, we now have time." They reached Lyra's ship just as another section of the colony collapsed. The remaining Lyrians, fewer than 50, were boarding their own vessels, preparing to abandon their lunar home of decades. As Lyra's ship lifted off, Mike watched through the view screen as the lunar colony disappeared beneath them, buried under tons of regolith as the cavern system finally gave way. Earth hung in the blackness ahead, beautiful and, for now, safe. "Where will your people go?" Mike asked as Lyra set course for Earth. "Some will return to the scattered remains of our fleet," she replied. "Others will ask for sanctuary on Earth. With the Vex threat proven real, your governments may be more willing to listen now." Mike nodded, then winced as pain shot through his temple. "And what about this?" he asked, holding up his hand with the embedded crystal. "What happens to me now?" Lyra's expression grew troubled. "I don't know. No human has ever bonded with Lyrian technology like this. The connection you established with the Vex network was unprecedented." She ran a scanner over his body, frowning at the results. "Your cellular structure is changing, adapting to accommodate the crystal." "Am I dying?" Mike asked bluntly. "No," Lyra said after a moment. "It's evolving, becoming something new." As if to confirm her words, the crystal pulsed, sending a wave of blue energy up Mike's arm. Instead of pain, this time he felt a surge of strength, his fatigue momentarily lifted. "I can still feel them," he whispered. "The Vex. Like distant whispers in my mind. They're regrouping, adapting their strategy." He looked at his palm again, where the crystal seemed to be sinking deeper into his flesh, becoming part of him. "This isn't over." "No," Lyra agreed, setting the final approach to Earth. "But thanks to you, the next battle will be on our terms." The ship entered Earth's atmosphere, blazing through the night sky like a meteor. Below, in the Arizona desert not far from where Mike's journey had begun, government vehicles were already gathering, tracking their descent. "They're expecting us," Lyra noted, eyeing the readouts. "Of course they are," Mike replied grimly. "They've probably been monitoring everything since the moment we left Earth." As the ship touched down on the desert floor, floodlights illuminated them from all sides. Military vehicles surrounded them, and figures in hazmat suits approached cautiously. "What now?" Lyra asked, uncertainty in her voice for the first time. Mike stood, surprised to find his strength returning rapidly. The crystal in his palm glowed softly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Something was definitely changing within him. "Now," he said with newfound resolution, "we make them listen. We make them understand what's coming. And we prepare." He reached for the hatch control, but paused as a strange sensation washed over him. Through his connection to the crystal, he suddenly sensed something unexpected. A signal, weak but distinct, coming from beneath the desert floor. It felt like the Nexus, but different somehow. Older. More powerful. "Mike?" Lyra asked, noticing his distraction. "What is it?" He turned to her, eyes wide with realization. "There's another Nexus here, hidden under the desert. It's been here for thousands of years." He looked down at the crystal in his palm, which was pulsing more rapidly now. "Your people have been to Earth before, haven't they? Long before my grandfather." Lyra's expression confirmed his suspicion before she could speak. "The elders never told me, but I suspected. Some of our oldest records hint at previous expeditions, lost colonies." "Not lost," Mike said, a strange smile spreading across his face as the pieces fell into place. "Waiting. Just like the genetic modifications in my family weren't random, they were activating something that was already there." He looked out at the military forces surrounding them. "Earth isn't just a potential ally against the Vex. It's the homeworld you've been trying to save all along." As if in response to his revelation, the crystal in his palm flared brilliantly, and deep beneath the desert, something ancient awakened. The desert night erupted with light as the crystal in Mike's palm connected with whatever lay buried beneath the sand. A beam of blue energy shot from his hand into the ground, creating a ripple effect that knocked the approaching military personnel off their feet. The vehicle's electronics failed, plunging the area into darkness except for the pulsing glow emanating from Mike. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, steadying herself against the ship's doorway. "I don't know exactly," Mike replied, staring in wonder at his hand. But it feels right. Like two pieces of a puzzle finally connecting. The ground began to tremble. Slowly at first, then with increasing intensity until the desert floor split open about 50 yards from where they stood. Sand cascaded into the widening fissure, revealing a metallic structure beneath, the unmistakable curve of ancient Lyrian architecture, but on a scale that dwarfed the lunar colony. Impossible, Lyra whispered, stepping out of the ship to get a better view. This technology is older than anything in our records. Military officials regrouped at a safe distance, clearly unsure how to proceed as more of the massive structure revealed itself. What had been hidden for millennia was now emerging from the earth, responding to Mike's presence. The tall figure separated from the military group and approached alone, hands raised in a gesture of peace. As he drew closer, Mike recognized him, an older man with silver hair and familiar features. "Grandpa?" Mike breathed in disbelief. The man smiled sadly. "Hello, Michael. I never thought I'd see you again." He looked much older than in Mike's childhood memories, but there was no mistaking Thomas Harper's eyes, the same eyes Mike saw in the mirror. "They told us you died," Mike said, his voice catching. "Heart attack, they said." "A necessary story," Thomas replied, glancing toward the military contingent. "After what I learned, what I helped put in motion." He looked down at Mike's palm where the crystal pulsed. "I see it found you after all." Lyra stepped forward. "You're the volunteer from the original contact." Thomas nodded. "One of several, but apparently the most compatible." He turned back to Mike. "I knew what they were planning for our bloodline, but not the full extent. When I started asking too many questions, I was given a choice: disappear into a government program or disappear permanently." "You've been working with them all this time?" Mike asked, gesturing toward the military. "Working for them, working against them, it got complicated," Thomas sighed. "What matters is preparing Earth for what's coming. The Vex are just the beginning." The ground had stopped shaking. From the massive opening, a platform rose smoothly to the surface, bathed in the same blue glow as Mike's crystal. On it stood a single object, a pedestal with a hand-shaped impression on its top. "It's calling to me," Mike said quietly. Thomas placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, there's no going back. Believe me, I know." Mike turned to Lyra. "Any advice?" She shook her head. "This goes beyond any knowledge my people have. But I trust you, Mike Harper. And I'll stand with you whatever comes next." Mike approached the pedestal slowly. The military personnel raised their weapons, but Thomas barked an order that made them hesitate. As Mike reached the platform, the crystal in his palm pulsed more rapidly, almost eager. "Here goes nothing," he murmured, and placed his hand into the impression. The connection was instantaneous and overwhelming. Information flooded his mind, not just data, but memories spanning thousands of years. He saw early humans interacting with Lyrian visitors, saw the gradual integration of their genetics, saw the ancient spacecraft being buried as protection against cosmic threats long forgotten. Most shocking of all, he saw the truth about the Lyrians themselves, not aliens, but humans who had left Earth eons ago, evolving differently on a distant world, only to return when both branches of humanity faced extinction. When Mike finally removed his hand, he was changed. The crystal had completely merged with his flesh, leaving only a faint, luminous pattern where it had been. His eyes held the same violet tint as Lyra's, though less pronounced. "I understand now," he said, his voice steady with newfound purpose. "The Lyrians aren't aliens. They're us, from a different path. And this," he gestured to the massive structure still emerging from the earth, "is a generation ship. The first one they built. Our ancestors buried it here as an insurance policy in case they ever needed to evacuate Earth." Thomas nodded slowly. "We suspected something like that, but we could never activate it." "Because you needed both bloodlines," Mike said, looking at Lyra. "Earth human and evolved Lyrian, together again after thousands of years of separation." The military was advancing cautiously now, led by officials in suits rather than soldiers. Above them, the night sky flickered as more ships entered the atmosphere. The surviving Lyrian fleet, responding to the activation of the ancient vessel. "What happens now?" Lyra asked. Mike looked from his grandfather to the approaching officials, then up at the incoming ships. "Now we prepare. The Vex will return, stronger and adapted to what we did today." He gestured toward the massive ship emerging from the sand. "But so will we. Together." In the months that followed, the truth about humanity's cosmic heritage slowly became public knowledge. The ancient generation ship, dubbed Earthseed by the media, became the center of a new joint human-Lyrian effort to prepare for the coming Vex invasion. Mike found himself in the unlikely role of ambassador between worlds, his unique genetic heritage making him the perfect bridge between Earth humans and their long-lost cousins. The crystal technology within him continued to evolve, granting him abilities that scientists struggled to understand but that proved invaluable in repurposing the ancient Lyrian technology. The Mars base was reclaimed and transformed into humanity's first true interplanetary defense outpost. Watches were established throughout the solar system, monitoring for the Vex's inevitable return point 1 year after that fateful day when Mike had purchased a seemingly worthless spacecraft at auction. He stood on the observation deck of Earthseed with Lyra and Thomas, watching as the first joint human-Lyrian ships prepared to launch, a scouting mission to establish early warning systems beyond Neptune. "Did you ever imagine any of this?" Lyra asked, standing close beside him. Their relationship had evolved too, complicated but genuine, bridging two branches of the same ancient tree. Mike shook his head, looking down at his palm where the faint blue patterns still glowed. "Not in a million years. I was just trying to find something worth flipping at that auction." He smiled. "Guess I got more than I bargained for." "The universe has a strange way of bringing things full circle," Thomas observed. "Our ancestors left Earth looking for a new home among the stars. Now their descendants have returned to help us defend our shared homeworld." Mike nodded, watching as the scout ships accelerated away, their engines flaring like new stars against the darkness. Earth hung beautiful and blue in the viewscreen behind them, no longer isolated, no longer alone in the cosmos. "Whatever comes next," Mike said, "we face it together. That's what family does." And somewhere in the vast darkness beyond their solar system, the Vex were regrouping, adapting, preparing for their return. But for the first time in countless millennia, humanity, in all its forms, was ready to stand united against the coming storm.